hit like, and subscribe. You're watching the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel.
Peace, family. This is your brother, Marc Lamont Hill. Welcome to Office Hours. Every week here on the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel, we hold Office Hours where we do a deeper dive on the most pressing issues, the most controversial subjects, the most engaged debates going on in the world today. And this week is no different. There's been a lot of conversation over the last week about Black Greek letter organizations, the Black sororities, the Black fraternities. It's been about all the things that goes on in those organizations. And it's happening for a couple of reasons. One, it's that time of year where people are starting to pop out on the internet, having crossed the burning sands of their respective organizations. And so you see a lot of conversation about it. And also, in addition to the normal annual celebrations and commemorations, there's also another, sadly, annual trend that has reemerged in the last week, and that is the sad death of a student while participating in initiation rituals of a Black fraternity. And it is sad. It is tragic when we hear that a student at Southern University in Louisiana, Caleb Wilson is his name, we've reported on it this week, was killed after being punched allegedly multiple times in the chest during a hazing ritual. And so against the backdrop of all of that, I wanted to have this conversation that I think needs to be had regardless of what time of year it is. And that is a question of, what's the value of Black Greek letter organizations? Are they relevant? Or do they do more harm than good? Do they do any good? Is this just a bunch of bougie Negroes throwing up gang signs? Or as Jim Jones said, is it just nothing but organized gangs who just filed for business paperwork? Or is there something more substantive here that we need to talk and think about? I want to get at all of it. And so I'm bringing in two incredibly smart and gifted people who know how to work the screens better than I do as well. On one side of the screen, you see Dr. Treva B. Lindsey. She is a professor at The Ohio State University at Women's and Gender Studies. She's also the authoress of an important book called America Goddamn. Actually, two important books. And in fact, the first book in some ways is even more relevant to the conversation we're about to have tonight. And we'll talk all about that. And then on the other side is Lawrence Ross, who's written a couple of important books as well. But the one that y'all might know him for the most is The Divine Nine, which is really still the preeminent text on Black Greek letter organizations. There's a new edition out. Make sure you check that one out as well. Welcome to both of y'all. Thank you for joining me on Office Hours.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I want to point out that while these two esteemed people are members of Black Greek letter organizations, they are not representatives of those organizations in any official and maybe even unofficial capacity. They just happen to pay their dues, or at least did. At one point, I don't know y'all business. And now they're here just giving their expertise as experts. If they weren't members of this organization, I would still value their expertise. It just so happened that these two people represent organizations. If they want to mention those organizations, they can. If not, I'm gonna mind my business.
Makes it hard for me to actually not mention mine with my
I was about to say
social media. I completely forgot about that until it popped up.
I was about to say, yeah, that's the worst. That's the worst attempt at being incognito I've ever seen.
My bad.
So I guess the first question I want to ask before we even get into the hazing stuff, and I'll start with you, Dr. Lindsey, is I see on Twitter every day, whenever something comes up about Black Greek letter organizations, I get tweeted. And I'm always told that I'm part of a secret boule, that I'm part of a secret society, that this is nothing but bougie Negroes who plot to take over the world, that this is Du Bois and the Talented 10. This is the worst of us. When we join these organizations, we're a part of these organizations. And I am a member of an organization as well, Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. If you couldn't see the coat of arms behind me. Dr. Lindsey, what say you?
I feel like we had a similar conversation a few weeks back when I was on here and it was Founders Day for the organization that I belong to. And that conversation about bougie Negroes, elitism, secret societies. What do these organizations mean in the 21st century? What can they mean? Do they mean at its best what they could mean? And at its worst, what is indicative of this? And I think they're similar to many Black organizations and Black institutions. The best of us, and I mean the best of us in terms of what we can do if we really anchored in the values and principles and traditions, organizing traditions, galvanizing communities at its best is amazing. And that's a lot of organizations within our communities. I also think at its worst, it can represent such incredible internalized anti-Blackness, colorism, patriarchy, conventional gender norms, anti-transness, anti-queerness, right? All of that can be present in these spaces as well. And we see that. And some of what I think about in terms of internalized anti-Blackness really comes in the ways that we treat each other. To join a brotherhood or a sisterhood and engage with each other in such harmful ways is deeply reflexive of other kinds of intercommunal harm that we see. You harm people in proximity to you. We are often struggling for grasping for power and what that can look like. And so often what I think we see playing out in some of that dynamics in these organizations is some of that grasping for power that evades so many in our communities. And I think it's really important to put that in the context of Black institutions and organizations broadly, and to think about what it means that folks who are in these organizations on college campuses and become alums of these organizations in various fields across are still thinking about how do we assert power and what does that look like? And I think that can have wonderful implications, and I think that can have absolutely horrendous and even death-dealing consequences that we see in that. I don't want to say ambivalent about responding to the question of the value of these organizations in the 21st century, but I never mind the question, because I think we need to be interrogated and thinking critically about what it is that we're not doing, so that every time this comes up, it's so easy to point out how irrelevant, bourgeois, out of touch, colorist, racist, elitist, all of these things these organizations are. What are we not doing that becomes the most salient thing for people who are not part of these organizations, are not wholly aware of these traditions and these histories? That says something to me. And that is an indictment I take very seriously, that we're not representing collectively in ways that offers a different idea of who we are and what we stand for.
Lawrence?
Oh, I mean, if people are talking about bougie, I'm like, oh, you don't know my family, okay? Because I'm the firstborn in California. My folks are from Texas, and I always say my family was bougie aspirational. We were like the ones with 1,000-count sheet on some air mattress type people. We were not the bougie type. And I'm, just to give you like a little bit of my, you talked about, whether or not I'm active or not or anything like that. I'm kind of like the prototypical kind of brother who has like everything in ducks in a row, right? I was initiated my second semester at Berkeley when I was 19 years old. So I've been an Alpha. This is going to be my 40th year as being Alpha. I've been chapter president of my alumni chapter that I founded. I chartered a college chapter, so 2 chapters. So I'm a life member. So I'm the person that you actually look to say that's dedicated to the organization and pays the dues and all the rest of the things. The problem is that when we talk about things, say, for example, about bougie and things like that, it really kind of flattens, the idea of who are the people in our organizations, right? I came into my fraternity through the chapter at Berkeley, okay? And the reason why I became a member of Alpha was because the brothers were all members of the South African divestiture movement, and that I was in, right? I was in the shanty houses. I didn't care about, the Martin Luther Kings and everything else like that in the list. I was just looking for an organization that met what I did. And as I was noted on Twitter, I was talking about the fact I went to probably the most prestigious all boys Jesuit high school out here in Los Angeles, Loyola High School. And Men for Others was the theme from 14 years old. And I had my mom always jokes that when I was 10 years old, she used to hold up her fist and introduce me as her black child, right? So you know, that idea in my head. I was looking for not for an organization that I could, you know, swim along with. I wanted an organization in which my ideas and my philosophies could be implemented. And so, but you have to recognize you're 19 years old, 20, 21, 22, or whatever. You have various levels of maturity. Some recognize that becoming a member of the organization is a way to be popular. If you think about it, and I always joke with my you know, I went to all boys high school. You know, I was like, an organization in which I will meet women, you know, at the same time was a value added for that. I had 4 years of not seeing women, even on the Berkeley campus. I was, you know, I didn't know how to talk to women, but that did not really override what my philosophy was. My philosophy was Black people. My philosophy is, what can I do for Black people? And I think when we talk about it, I think when the outside actually asks that question, it's a legitimate question. But then at the exact same time, when folks talk about what bougie or whatever, they don't really understand that most people who become members of our organizations are first generation college students, you know, who've never, you know, don't have ties to, a fraternity or a sorority, or don't have members of their family who are members of fraternities and sororities. They saw a reason to become a member, whether or not it was because of mentorship that was before, and they said, I like that, or community service that was happening, or just the social. The social is just as important as anything else, but it's what you make do. And if you, and as a community, we're responsive to the Black community in particular as organizations. So I am welcoming of any sort of criticism. If we don't do well in terms of their outreach, or we do performative instead of substantive, I want to know about it. But guess what? In chapter meeting, we just had one last week, we talk about that. You know, for example, we talk about the fact, why are we just concentrating on young men who want to go to four-year schools? And when we know that there's a population of students who want to go to trade schools, we are part of the community. And
so is it possible then that there is, that it might not be entirely accurate to say that the demographics are bougie in the sense of hardcore class politics or economics,
yeah,
but that the rituals, the traditions, and the kind of exclusivity that it produces does lead to a kind of disconnect from everyday Black people. Like, there are a lot of everyday Black people that feel like, I don't see none of these Divine Nine organizations in my world. And because Black Greek letter organizations are something that go far beyond, the connections go far beyond college. Mm-hmm. You know, when you walk around seeing people wearing these colors or doing these things or at these events or whatever, it doesn't feel like, this isn't poor people stuff. This isn't working class people stuff in general.
Well, college in general is only 38% of Americans go to college. So, but the very nature of going to college is if you want to talk about elitism, is elite. So therefore, when you talk about, say, for example, of the 38%, 5 to 10% become members of fraternities and sororities. I mean, so you're talking about a pool within a pool, right? And in terms of the pool within a pool, you know, yeah, we talk about, again, even flattening W.B. Du Bois, right? You know, we talk about, you know, the talented 10 because that's the most popular thing, but we don't talk about how Du Bois actually evolved over a period of time. Nor did we talk about the multiplicity of the types of people who are in our organizations. Even just, for example, at Berkeley, one of the things that I love about, and her name just rolled out of my head, and Dr. Lindsey going to kill me because she's Delta. One of the founders of Kappa chapter for Delta Sigma Theta at Berkeley was a communist, was a member of the Communist Party in the Harlem Renaissance. And so you have different variations of people who come into our organizations. You know, Bayard Rustin is a member of Omega Psi Phi, right? He is the man who is basically the architect for the philosophical, you know, nonviolent strategy within the civil rights movement. So it is kind of disingenuous to just say, you know, as I call them, Negropeans are the people who are the parts of the Divine Nine. I think what you have is just a natural elitism that comes from being a member of a college organization. Going to college and then joining NSBE is an elite organization for engineers. I'm not a part of NSBE. I'm okay with NSBE existing as long as they're going to allow
But NSBE don't step up in the party and make everybody feel like outliers when they start strolling through with engineering walks. You know what I'm saying? But your point's well taken. Judah Talks writes in and says, I have a question. This is for both y'all. I'll start with you, Doc. How can we be leaders when we continue to follow the customs and traditions of nations with a history of oppression against our people. People hear the word Greek, and they immediately assume, right or wrong, that these organizations are very much like bound to European identity, that the goal of these organizations is to be Greeks. What, you know, I always get, why you don't got African letters, right? Why you're not African organizations? Why are you Greek organizations? What do you say?
Dr. Lindsey, I'll let you go.
I mean, that question is always interesting to me. I think.
First, let me ask you a clarifying question. How long have you wanted to be a Greek woman? let's get that out of the way so we can clear it.
Not a single day in my life have I wanted to be a Greek woman. I think that there is a real disconnect between what is known about our organizations, what is the truth of these organizations, why there are Greek letters, why there is this study in this when we think about the role that classics played in early education of African Americans that are happening on campuses, moving from the late 19th into the early 20th century, what that would have meant, what it means to code, what it means to be legible, what it means to create particular things. There are all kinds of traditions within our respective organizations that are deeply rooted in diasporic traditions as well. I want to not be on a defensive posturing of this. I understand the question. And I think, again, when we're talking about those small pools that get even smaller and thinking about this, is that there's a lot more education we could be doing as members of Black Greek letter organizations about those histories and having very real conversations about anti-Blackness and colonialism and this. There's so many conversations that this could prompt, but so often we get caught up in what I feel is like the very low-hanging fruit.
Right.
Therefore, it's like anti-Black. And it's like, well, that's not quite what's happening here, sis. But I understand the question is coming from the space of, there are these organizations that are anchored or supposed to be anchored in Black communities. And I feel like the language that y'all are expressing this in does not reflect that. Could we have a conversation about what that means for you and why you feel that way, right? Like, that's a very different way. And that is an invitation. For me, that's an opportunity at education. It's not an opportunity to be like, you just don't get it. The end, right?
Right.
I feel like a lot of people here when it's that kind of polarization.
Yeah,
Laurentius, what say you?
And it's also, we also, when you say that, it's also one of those things where it kind of erases how African Americans have always redefined whatever the term actually is. But not you talk about Richard Allen, who decides, okay, I want an African Methodist Episcopal Church. Is still part of the Methodist tradition, but he wants to redefine it. Everything we've done in this country is always about being redefining to be inclusive of how we envision what we see as a Black way of going forward. So if say, for example, at the, into the early parts of the 20th century, the symbolism that you see in many of the organizations tilt toward the East, not toward the West. So, for example, you'll see Delta Sigma Theta with the pyramid. You see Alpha Phi Alpha with the Sphinx. You see Phi Beta Sigma with the moon and crescent. You see these are people who obviously reject what would be turned back in the early parts of the 20th century, an Anglo-Saxon kind of understanding. These are people who are not, we tend to underestimate the Black people from earlier generations about the dangers, and not only then their consciousness about their situation in a Jim Crow Plessy versus Ferguson world, right? That doesn't mean that they're not, having to deal with the same things of colorism or internalized racism that everyone else is dealing with. But it also does mean that they are pretty clear that what they're trying to do is to move Black people forward, right? It may be imperfect in terms of how they're trying to do it, but also note that fraternalism, when we go back to white fraternalism and then go to white male fraternalism and then post Civil War white women fraternalism, nothing of that was connected to community. None of that was connected to social action. None of that was connected to anything except to making a college campus that included theology and calculus and all the things that were boring for them, and trying to create other things, say, for example, literary societies that they could actually have some freedom to talk about, right? And to gather and have experiences. Well, African-American fraternalism said, no, there's a connection between not only the social network that we create, but the connection to what we're trying to do in the community. So when you see the earliest things for Delta Sigma Theta, first thing they do, the women's suffragette movement. You see Kappa Alpha Psi with the Guide Right program. You see Alpha Phi Alpha with the voteless people as the hopeless people. These aren't not things that you just, well, of course they would do. We defined our organizations by those things. And it's important to recognize that when you do that, as imperfect as they may be, they are still steps forward than actually being in a state of stasis.
So I'm glad you said that, this idea of social action, because in the last few years, I'll say the last 10, time be moving different on this side of 40. I have noticed some very particular moments where Black Greek-led organizations have not shown up. Or even worse, they have discouraged the act of showing up. I'll be specific. I remember being in Ferguson, which I guess now it was 2014. So you're talking about 11 years ago. And the only people I saw outside as an organization were Deltas. I saw Deltas outside with jackets on. And I'm not sure, you know, y'all might know better than me the timeline of that. But I know other people were discouraged at various times from wearing their letters at the protests in Ferguson. And I saw several organizations issue statements that were at best ambivalent about their position on these matters. And I can tell you that at the time, as somebody who was I was the co-chair of social action, the national co-chair for social action for my organization. There were some very serious conversations from people who said, look, it wasn't around Ferguson, it was around Colin Kaepernick, who said, look, we support Colin Kaepernick. He's our brother. We want to stand in solidarity with him, but we also have a lot of police officers in this organization. We have a lot of military folk in this organization. And so the conversation about whether to kneel or not is complicated for us. It wasn't complicated for me. But as an organization, people said it's complicated. And so there's a way that, because these organizations, again, are often tied to interests, entities, institutions, etc., there's a way that sometimes the radical politics ain't going to be there. What might seem obvious on the ground to many of us to protest this or that become more complicated, you know? And so I guess the question for me is, do these, and maybe it's really two questions, because one of the things that came through from Reese Palmer was, what about the Divine Nine is revolutionary? You know, and so for me, I guess I begin from a place of saying, well, I don't expect the organization to be revolutionary. I don't think that's what they're designed to be. But now I'm like, are we even progressive at this point? Where are we? And is it a lack of political? Is it that they have a different political analysis than I just might have? Or do they have the right vision and just scared?
Well, if I can just speak, this is one thing I can say about Alpha. That no one in Alpha, from the general president down, ever would actually make it a statement to say that Alphas can't participate in any type of social action. In fact, I remember our general president Tillman was very specific. The internal culture for Alpha is that we all believe we're mini Martin Luther Kings. Seriously. Okay, so the idea of telling Alphas that they cannot participate in a social action of anything, social justice, is almost absurd within the fraternity. Now, having said all that, I think there's a cautionary tale that what happens with, you know, a small c conservatism that occurs when organizations at their corporate level may have a disconnect between what's happening with their grassroots, and that's always a problem. Now, there was a question about, you know, whether or not Divine Nine members or Divine Nine organizations are revolutionary, and I'll push back on the idea that Divine Nine isn't a revolutionary. Depends on what you mean by the revolution. If you are talking about whether or not you're talking about organizations that have been basically incubators for creating leadership within the organizations, as have basically as a petri dish for taking 19, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds and sometimes older, and giving them the experience to be able to understand how to lead and how to follow. Yeah, that's revolutionary. I don't take anything for granted. I always talk about the fact that just because the organizations are called, Divine Nine, doesn't mean they're divine right to actually exist. And to exist this long, you don't exist this long just simply based upon yacht parties and teas. You exist because you have a commitment to your communities, and your communities, not just in this country, but across the world. The question is, what do you consider to be revolutionary? And is it truly revolutionary? And what are you thinking about when you talk about revolutionary? How are you changing the space to be in a place which it is no longer how it was, and that you're now making progress, and this is continuous progress in terms of moving the community forward. And the last bit of it is, and I don't say this and I want to make sure to be very distinctive. I don't say this as a name dropping type of deal. But when we talk about all the leaders, whether or not you talk about Dorothy Height, we're not talking about, Martin Luther King, Huey Newton, all on the right, they did not become members of the organizations just because they decided that, the organizations themselves would do something for them. They looked at it as being, this is something that I find of value and find people with like-minded values. So that's the same thing that has to happen when we talk about their headquarters and making sure that they're tapped into what's actually happening on the grassroots. So they're going to disconnect it between that versus what the members truly want to do, which is go out and use the tools that they've been trained to actually be to do.
TK said, which one was CDP Newton? He was in Phi Beta Sigma. Along with Bill Clinton and Al Sharpton.
You.
What? Was that petty?
Yes, it was petty.
Yes, you were petty.
Petty.
I don't know. I was just trying to be helpful.
That was not me, y'all.
That was not helpful. Yeah. My answer is a little more. Right. My organization, as you said, when we were in Ferguson, a lot of us had on our letters. A lot of us had on our jackets. A lot of us were like, this is the tradition we're stepping into. This is the tradition literally of our founders to disrupt and be present. However, we got something from Grand Chapter not long after that, asking us not to wear our letters at protests, particularly when there were pictures in the media of sorors being arrested with their letters on, right? So there was this interesting tension that was happening. And as you mentioned, there's sometimes a real, and oftentimes, not even sometimes, distinction between folks who are doing this kind of grassroots work there, and then our corporate entities and the other parties that are involved and invested in these organizations. What I will say, which I think echoes an earlier point that I made, is that these organizations are microcosms of Black communities as well. This is why it always is like, it's not just bougie Negroes or working class. There's a whole range of people, which means there's a range of political perspectives, opinions, backgrounds, folks who have organizing experience, don't have organizing experience. I have sorors who identify as socialists, Marxists. I have sorors who identify as Black capitalists. I think there's a range within our organizations. And so that to me always means, right, there's revolutionary potential, because I do think there are people within our organizations who have absolutely radical politics and are tapping into a particular tradition within respective organizations. Conversely, we have people who are invested in another kind of tradition that exists within a lot of these organizations that is more socially conservative, that is more politically conservative. And so I think that range and that tension comes out in these moments when we ask, what is the position of X organization on this? I think that there's considerable energy around pushing towards more progressive visions within that. I've been heartened to see more organizations talking about LGBTQ plus IA identity, and folks talking about reproductive justice. I've seen more of that in the last few years, but I think we can go farther. But that would require us as an organization to look at those political fault lines within our organizations, which are similar fault lines within Black communities more generally. right? And that's why I feel like there's more connection between Black communities and BGLOs than often we try and say that they're over there and they're just bourgeois and elite. It's like we represent so many of the tensions, productive tensions, if we want them to be, that exist within our community. There is not a singular Black consciousness. So we have to think about the ways that we can mobilize, understanding that folks have very different ideas about what freedom looks like, what we need to do to get there. And that comes out in our organizations. I think you're muted, bro.
Sorry. One day I learned how to work this thing. 20 years in the business. Every week I still be like
5 years into the Zoom world.
Right, exactly. I'm so glad that you mentioned LGBTQIA communities, because this is another space that has produced or by this space, I mean the organizations that are become another space where we see these really intense antagonisms and contradictions and fights and debates within the Black community. Again, I don't think there's anything unique about Black Greek-led organizations on this matter. You go to any Black church, you're gonna have this conversation. You go to any Black sports team, you're gonna have this conversation. A sports league, whatever. But the question of Black Greek-led organizations and queer communities, trans communities, etc., is a fascinating one. Now, there have always been LGBTQIA members inside of our organizations. There's no doubt about that. And there's a way that we've even been somewhat honest about that, even though it's often been underwritten by homophobia and transphobia. When we learned chants, we learned that the alphas were the gay ones, right? I wouldn't pledge that gay alpha, that A-phi-A, right?
I have a counter chant.
Exactly. And then the alphas learn the same, you know what I mean? And it goes back and forth. So everybody is like, oh yeah, there's gay Black Greeks, they just over there, right? They just somewhere else. So it's like in hip hop looking for the gay rapper, like there was one. You know what I mean?
Just to know here, there's a real conversation about masculinity that's in here that I just want us to highlight, because it doesn't register necessarily the same way. There are different conversations that are happening among sororities, Black sororities.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think that particular kind of queer antagonism is directly connected to masculinity and
that's my point.
That's
what I'm saying. Fraternities. No, I appreciate you pointing that out, because I'm saying that I think it's just a fraternity. I think sororities have a whole other thing going on that needs some help unpacking. It's the fraternities that I think have been the most hostile spaces. I think it's the hypermasculine spaces that have been the most dangerous and the most violent toward queer folk. Not to say that sororities have been easy, but fraternities have been a whole other thing. It's almost like I've been in conversations with people at various organizations who have very explicitly said, "Ain't nobody gay coming into my organization. Go over there." Right. And I've only had those conversations with fraternities. And it's always been disturbing to me. There's another level to this I want to get to around the trans question, which has been very urgent in the last 5 years, particularly Sigma, Kappa. At least 2 organizations I know have had to deal with trans applicants. But just around the queer question, I would have thought, and maybe this is my naivete, but I would have thought, 100 years into almost all of these organizations, 62 for the IOTAs, which is still a long time. You know what I'm saying? That we would be in a space of a more progressive space. The whole world has sort of moved a little bit on this issue. Yeah. And it seems like we still don't have room to openly acknowledge and welcome queer folk in our, at least on the fraternity side. Now, again, on the sorority side, I think it's more complicated. And I would love to hear more about that, because I just don't know that world as well. I have my own beliefs about it, but I, but it seems like we've just done of all the things we've done a terrible job on. This seems to be at the top of the list for me of things we just haven't done well. Yeah. Why don't you pick up there first?
I look at it like we are so behind. It's not even funny, and I always think it's a tragedy in that what we look at is we say, "You are my brother," right? And then you have a brother who cannot express themselves as a brother. Right. And what typically, fraternities basically Black fraternities operate on a don't ask, don't tell type of policy. Right. You can be my sans, you can be mad cool, just as long as basically you ascribe to what I believe to be an outwardly heterosexual, everything that we talk about. You feel comfortable in the spaces in which I dictate. right? And you assimilate into it, fine. Now you may actually be running most of the chapters, in terms
it's often the case, particularly at the grad chapter level. I mean, you see,
yeah, you may be running all that, but you have to keep all that hidden. And I think, like every organization, things become, as generations keep going and more people get more education. And in particular, this is the thing that I've actually found, and maybe this is just kind of based upon my own anecdotal observations, is that the folks who on the coast begin to understand the complexities of sexuality, sexual orientation, a little bit more than when we actually start talking about places that may not actually talk and open about LGBTQIA folks on a regular basis. And so there's kind of a shunt them to the side. No, don't put them over here, because particularly within fraternities, remember, fraternities are all designed to basically be the epitome of what your manhood is about, right? So I'm an alpha, right? And so, yeah, if I went to way back in the day, if I went to this tell y'all old, went to a Greek show, right? And not a step show, a Greek show, and the Kappas all started saying gay, fi, gay. I already in my head still have a misogynist counter to that, right? Now I know it's misogynist now, but not at the time that I was doing it, right? I hadn't been educated at all about LGBTQIA folks or misogyny, right? None of that, because misogyny was not was a value added. It wasn't something that you were penalized for, because the reason why I got up on that stage is to not only step, but I'm here to be as sexy as possible, right? And not only that, the alphas in the audience are looking at me and they saying, he reflects the manhood that we all say that we represent, right? And then, you can have a whole bunch of other mixtures of things that bring in to what we talk about hazing. And hazing is that when you start trying to protect that as much as possible, violence and power basically combine to create kind of the atmosphere of who is the real man. So that's the reason, number one, internally, and I am not immune to this. Internally, when we sit back with our fraternity brothers or Greeks together, we will talk about our pledge process. And we will talk about not what we solved, but how tough we were, right? How wonderfully we did X, Y, and Z that had never been done, and then we validate each other based upon that. So it becomes kind of a loop. And then that oftentimes really puts LGBTQ folks out on the side, right? Who may not have been looking for that, right? That validation, not looking for that. And there's no disconnect between manhood and sexual orientation, but I'm saying they're not looking for that heterosexual validation that comes from that heterosexual version of manhood. And so that puts them almost always in a corner. It has gotten slightly better. Now I'm talking about this as a straight man, so I cannot, I'm not speaking for the experiences of LGBTQ members in the Divine Nine, but I have been immersed in this for like the last 25 years in terms of watching fraternalism on writ large. And I've seen, like Shauna Lawson, for example, has done some really great work with HBCUs, and also doing work with within the Divine Nine in the LGBTQIA community. So we're again,
I want to bring treatment on this. For me, most of the progressive work I've seen has happened on the sorority side. I just see very little work on the fraternity side. And maybe I'm not seeing all of it because that's not the work that I do on a day-to-day, but I just don't see it. And the extent that I do see it, I see it still somewhat don't ask, don't tell. But I when I see it on the graduate level. And I can say, for example, I know an alumni chapter of Alphas where the president of chapter has been gay, where he's been openly gay, married. They're friends of mine, in fact. I've seen this. There seems to be at least spaces or chapters. Where that's the thing where I haven't seen that with the other organizations, and including my own. And I don't know I don't know how to make sense of it or what, other than just it looks like classic homophobia to me. But I have seen some progress on the women's side in a much more open on a much more open way. I've seen LGBTQ advocacy. I've seen open conversations. I've seen the organizational, I won't say endorsements, but they've celebrated members and openly identified and recognized them as queer, which is something I've never seen on the male side. And again, I don't want to romanticize the other side either. I'm sure it's messy everywhere, but what are you seeing? How do you see this?
I mean, okay, so I see one as a bi-queer woman who's in an organization, right? That for me, I would say it's better, but our organizations are about defining womanhood and manhood. Still within a very rigid binary, which is still for a lot of us, that also results in like, this is heterosexuality. Like we are paired with an organization, either, you know, not necessarily the bottom right of Phi Beta Sigma and Zeta Phi Beta, but, you know, like the Bruds and the Reds, right? The First Fam, right? The Kappas and the Poodles. So like the Indiana connection, like there are ways that, again, it's about this pairing, this kind of compulsory heterosexuality that I still think is expected, even when we're talking about, okay, you know, I was very happy to see that Delta put something up for Pride this year. That was very heartening. Mm-hmm. Do I still think at our core, we've dealt with both the social conservatism, the homophobia, the transphobia? Just like we said, you know, when I think about the thing of like hip hop is reflective of society more broadly, I think our BGLOs are reflective of society more wholly. Right now, we're spending tens of millions of dollars so that less than a dozen trans athletes can compete in NC2A sports. Like, that is a transphobic world in which we're inhabiting, and that most people support the banning of trans athletes. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I don't think our organizations are immune to the phobias and the oppressive logics and the reproduction of that, whether it's finer womanhood, pretty girls, devastating divas. There is still a space in which there is a femininity that we're being asked to comport to. And when we deviate from that, there are spaces of affirmation of that, but it's still, you better come to ritual in your skirt, in your button down, in your tights. There are things you still are doing that absolutely reify a particular kind of femininity within that. So it is not making space for queerness, certainly. Acknowledging that queer people exist, that LGBTQ plus IA people exist, does not in fact change the conditions for LGBTQIA people within these organizations. Right. And if we're taking a temperature of where we are as a society right now, I'm still incensed that none of my organizations, right, that sororities within a Divine Nine have said a word about the rate at which Black trans women are killed. I'm still disturbed about the ways that we don't hear about targeted violence against Black queer folks. These are things we should be speaking out on, and we're not. So progress to me is like, especially considering like one of the first presidents of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, a queer Black woman, Lucy Dix Slow, right? We can go back in the history and we can do that kind of outing thing that we want to do with history. But I think what's more important is that embedded within that is saying, we've always wanted the work of queer folks. We just don't want your queer lives and your queer humanity affirmed. We want your Black queer labor. And I think that's where we need to check that. We see that in the church too. We see that in other Black organizations. As long as your queer humanity is not what we have to take in, we'll take your queer labor.
Absolutely. Somebody wrote in here, and real quick, I want y'all to respond to this. Born, liberated, empathetic world said, Divine Nine and religious Black folks are never going to be free until they let go of the Abrahamic religion. Specifically, they're inherently homophobic and anti-Black. Y'all think gays are a defect because your religion given to you by your oppressor says so. So, I mean, there's a point there, right? Is that there's a way that we talk about sort of the intractability of racism in American society because it's built on white supremacy and racial capitalism. Yeah. You know, if these organizations are built on these Judeo-Christian principles and values and ideals and ideologies, is this another intractable problem? Can we uproot this, or do we have to find something else?
Well, before I forget, I want to give a shout out to Treva B, who's the president of Phi Beta Sigma. He is the only president of one of the Divine Nine I've ever seen actually show up for conversation on LGBTQ folks. And I just want to, I don't know what's happening within internally with Phi Beta Sigma, but I just know he has made his presence known. I would dispute that it's Judeo-Christian that our organizations are actually based upon. Now, I would say that because of our members being overwhelmingly Black, members being kind of, if you're Black and you're a member, you probably are going to be Judeo-Christian of some sort. But the organizations itself, in terms of the basis of the founding of the organization, don't necessarily have to adhere to it. But my biggest thing is that when you swim in the ocean, you get wet, right? So if you swim in the ocean of America, of capitalism and white supremacy, you're gonna get wet with capitalism and white supremacy, right? So it's important to recognize, yes, we are influenced by all those other things. But I keep getting, this is the one thing that gets me. And I kind of go back to a quote from Malcolm X. It was kind of paraphrasing this, but it was like, they don't hang you because, you're a Baptist or, a Catholic. They hang you because you're Black. They don't hang you because you're an Alpha or a Kappa or a Delta or an AKA. They hang you because you're Black. So this notion that, Black fraternities and sororities are somehow in their own enclave over this other place, that they're not integrated with every other aspect of society, which you probably won't even know 90% of the fraternity and sorority members that they didn't tell you is insane to me. So we are effective, as Dr. Lindsey's been saying so wonderfully, is that we are integrated with all these things, so we have all the same problems. It's just that these are amplified because when you look at it as a collective, you can go, oh, they're the ones with the collective problems, but we're just a subset of every aspect of organizing. If you want to look at the Links, if you want to look at Jack and Jill, if you wanted to look at Eastern Star, if you wanted to look at any of them, you could find the exact same things. And so, to the poster's point, I'm always willing to explore non-harmful philosophical systems. And I don't have an idea that a philosophical system is written in stone. The philosophical system that said that Black people were chattel slavery was written in stone for generations until it wasn't. It morphed, but it's not chattel slavery, right? So we can create new philosophies, even redefining what Judeo-Christian philosophy is. It's not written in stone that you have to follow. I don't follow any fundamentalist church that would be a MAGA church or anything like that, right? We have within our power to redefine things, and it doesn't necessarily. We should blow things up when we recognize that they have no use. But I always say, for example, when it comes to Christianity, Jesus had a wonderful message, but terrible salespeople. And oftentimes what happens is that if we have to redefine how we train our salespeople about the message, then maybe the message is okay. It's our people that are doing the bad job of actually interpreting what Christianity actually is. Maybe we as fraternity and sorority members are doing a bad job of interpreting what fraternalism actually is. And if that's the case, hold us to account. Then that's what we need to change.
I want to ask specifically now about the question of trans membership. Mm-hmm. I know for a fact that at least 2 organizations have at least extended membership to, and initiated mm-hmm. Trans men into the respective organization.
Right.
To my knowledge, I can say with complete certainty that one of the organizations rescinded the membership. I believe the second one has at this point as well, but I cannot confirm that because I just don't know. Based on my research, it's not as easy to find out as one might think. Y'all wouldn't be surprised to know that. But the first organization absolutely rescinded membership. It sparked a very interesting conversation. Not one that shocked me, that revealed that the bulk of the membership did not believe that trans membership was appropriate because of the founding goals and ideals of the organization. Where do you stand on it? What do you think about it? And how do we deal with it moving forward? You can feel free to answer any one of those questions, because I don't want to put y'all on the spot. I really just want to think through this with y'all because y'all are smart people.
I'll go first if Dr. Lindsey, if you want to go first. Okay, so here's what I think about it. One, I think it reflects.
I'm sorry. Let me add one more thing to this.
Okay.
Let me add one more thing to this. In the aftermath of those scandals, organizations issued official statements banning trans members. I can't leave that part out.
Yeah. I
know Alpha Phi Alpha. This is public. In July, I believe. Let me look. July of 2024. Reportedly became the second Black fraternity to ban trans members after Phi Beta Sigma did. They did it 7 years earlier. Again, it seems that they did so based on not Alpha, but Phi Beta Sigma did so based on actually having inducted a member. I don't believe that Alpha Phi Alpha necessarily inducted a member. I'm not sure of that one way or the other. Maybe you could speak to that more. But I do know they issued a ban on it. And sometimes it, to me, felt like a solution in search of a problem. Yeah. Like, why are we issuing national bans on things where this isn't? I don't even know this to be an issue or a challenge or a crisis or whatever. But anyway, I don't want to keep talking. Go ahead.
Yeah, of course. I'm speaking about based upon myself. So not with the organization, but right. I look at it from the standpoint of a number of different things. We are woefully ignorant about about identity. We're woefully ignorant about, even within the grander space of fraternalism, about how, beyond just the Divine Nine, in terms of predominantly white fraternities and sororities, in terms of how they're more inclusive of trans members into their organizations. And this is the thing that I always get. I never understood. My own personal feeling for it is, to me, for the fraternity of Martin Luther King, the fraternity of activism, again, the fraternity that we all look at ourselves as being ahead of, finding expanded civil rights for people. I was saddened. I was absolutely saddened by it. Mainly because it's absurd. Again, I say I'm an absurdist, but it's absurd because this is what can happen. 5 seconds after you're initiated, you can reveal that you are trans. And there's nothing that I know that would actually occur in terms of rescinding your membership. Maybe I don't know my Alpha Constitution, but I don't know that would be a way of being able to revoke your membership. Nor would it be.
You mean before the ban?
I'm not sure. Again, do not ever confuse.
Understood. I just understand the argument. Yeah.
But even before the ban, right? In the exact same way, for example, folks would be talking about they didn't want gay members into Alpha. What are you going to do? Like, what are you doing? What are they doing to create something that makes Alpha not Alpha? Just tell me what they're doing, other than their sexuality. And I don't understand that. And it's one of them infuriating things, because you see something that you know is wrong. You can advocate it. You can advocate in your chapter meetings. You can do a whole bunch of things, but the level of education that needs to happen just on a base level is overwhelming. And is influenced by a lot of things. And we've talked about, Judeo-Christian stuff. I can give academic understandings of trans folks and how human people are, and they will go back on Sunday to a church that will tell them that they are marked by the mark of God, of the devil, right? And it's like fighting entities within the Black community, and you go, these are people in our community. These are Black people. I don't have terms and conditions when it comes to Black people, and yet we do. That's where we fail utterly.
Treva, I want you to respond. I want to bring in this brother's comment. Kyle, who says, I don't understand why someone would want to join an organization they feel is not for them. Just create something. I think if we're talking about trans folk, or queer folk or trans folk, or the entire community of people we've been discussing, might say is, well, the organization as such is for me. I'm being excluded because of this other thing. In other words, let me put it differently. I think they would say this organization should be for me. And the fact that I'm being left out of it, for example, if a church said we're not letting queer people in, yeah, you could say, well, why does a queer person want to go to a church that doesn't want them? but the argument might be the church is supposed to be for everybody. I believe that this is my way to salvation. This is an affirmation of my faith. And so the change shouldn't happen on my end, it should happen on the other end. And historically, Negroes have fought to get into a lot of places that didn't want them.
Right.
You know, the fight for public accommodation. I mean, all this stuff was about getting into places that weren't for us. But what we said was that they should be. And so we fought to make them that way. Yeah. There's debates about what that means, but it's at least a conversation worth having. But Treva, I wanted to bring you in and to respond to anything you want to.
You know, I would say so often when we're talking about trans folks, genderqueer folks, and non-binary folks is in the context of scandal and struggle and scandalizing. So first, I just want to acknowledge that and just first, right, acknowledge trans humanity and people and personhood, because I think that it first and foremost is important in these conversations. But I think that there is something so deeply disturbing for all of us to be indicted about the ways we close ranks around some perceived notion or idea of gender, manhood, womanhood, whatever that may be. It is just infuriating, and it doesn't get us freer, y'all. It just doesn't get us freer. I don't think that we are in a space, right? I think our Black Greek letter organizations are very similar to other parts of the Black communities as it pertains to trans folks, genderqueer folks. There are no movements. There are no movements that aren't trans-led that are about all of the conditions that Black trans folks encounter in this world, the rates of murder, the rates of violence against them. We're not marching and pushing back against all of these bans that are happening right now. These are things about us because we feel so tightly, again, these categories that are so encasing. And I know for women, right, for Black women in particular, who are always read in this country outside of womanhood, that for some reason, so many of us feel that closing ranks about some narrow idea about what womanhood is will make us more woman or make us more recognizable by white supremacy as women. And I'm here to tell you that that shit doesn't work. That's not what it does. What it does is take us away from our sisters. What it does is divide us. What it does is keep us farther from liberation than we want to be. I think it's a really difficult thing when we are preemptively saying that we're closing ranks around humanity in such narrow and rigid ways. I think it is fundamentally anti-Black. To me, to being anti-trans is a form of anti-Blackness as well within our spaces. And I think we have to do better about that. I think that question earlier about why would you want to join something you feel isn't for you? It's not that they feel it isn't for them, right? As you said, they absolutely say, like, I'm a devastating diva. I'm a pretty girl. I want finer womanhood.
Right.
This is who I am. I want to be in spaces with other badass sisters broadly doing this work and committing to this. Why wouldn't I be welcome in that space? Why wouldn't I want a Marsha P. Johnson in my space? Why wouldn't I want a Miss Major in my space? Why wouldn't I want an Elle Moxley in my space, a Raquel Willis in my space, a Janet Mock, a Laverne Cox? We can keep going. Why wouldn't I want them? They've helped define culture and been at the front lines of liberation for that. Yet and still, we want to close ranks because we're deciding that assigned female at birth is the only way that you exist as a woman, or assigned male at birth is the only way you exist as a man. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And we lose. We're all losing because of that. And apparently you're a Sigma now. I'm seeing that in the comments, Mark.
Yeah, I did. That's Van Lathan. I don't know if you know, he pledged grad chapter Phi Iota Phi Theta. He's spring 25. Congrats, Van. We're proud of you.
Congrats.
Congratulations.
And I think because of that, he has a lot of energy and verve.
He's Mr. Neophyte.
Mr. Neophyte, Mr. Iota Neophyte. Yes. Let's move on to one other thing that I want to ask you all about, which is the big thing that everybody's talking about in the news, and that's hazing.
Right.
I want to play a clip from Jim Jones, but I feel like I'm going to end up getting a copyright violation, and it never works out for me when I play these clips. So just assume I was going to do a Jim Jones impersonation, but I feel like that's going to end up bad for me too.
Right.
So for like multiple reasons. So instead, just pretend there was a clip playing where Jim Jones. You know what? Let me. I could just be a news
fine.
person.
We can interpret it.
I'm just gonna read. I'm gonna read the quote. That way I ain't gotta do the bootleg impersonation, and I ain't gotta get a copyright violation. But what he said was, and he said this. I was there when he said this. I was sitting across from him. On the Joe Budden podcast, he said, gangs aren't much different from fraternities, Freemasons, or other brotherhoods. He said, in fact, here's the exact quote. He said, a blood is a fraternity. He's talking about his organization, the Bloods. He said, a blood is a fraternity. The only difference is that fraternities file legal paperwork. If someone filed blood as Blood Alpha right now and made it official, it could be in colleges too. Being blood isn't a crime. What you do as a blood determines if it's a crime, but that doesn't mean every blood is a criminal. He further went on to say plenty of fraternity members have broken laws, and nobody talks about that.
Yeah,
Q Dogs, Freemasons, Congress, they all have their own structure. It's all about brotherhood. The difference, fraternities offer business connections, legal opportunities, but in many ways, Bloods do the same thing, helping their own, giving opportunities. So what's the real difference?
So when you hear things like that, they always have grains of truth. And I always tell people, I'm from Inglewood, California, where the Bloods are actually formed, right? 3 of my cousins were Bloods. They're retired Bloods, okay? And I used to ask my mom, I was like, when I was like 14, I was like, why are they coming over to Thanksgiving? And she was like, gangsters need Thanksgiving too.
Gangsters like mac and cheese.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I think this is where people, when they get on that elitism thing, don't realize that Bloods and Crips go to college too. And Bloods and Crips actually join organizations too. I have a funny story about one of my fraternity brothers who turned out to be an absolute, and I mean absolute, pillar of the community. Oh. But when he first crossed, he was like, I don't understand how this fraternity thing worked. And then we both had to leave from the parking lot because he thought he was still, a member of one of the gangs, right? He talks about the fact that acculturation for college students should not assume middle-class people all coming into these spaces. So when he talks about, on a simplistic basis of just talking about groups, yes, you can sit up and say we're both groups. And you can say, yes, Bloods do some, throwing out turkeys. I've seen it all. But the point of Bloods and Crips is not for the upliftment of the community. It is typically a substitute for family that is not there. It is usually something that I am replacing your family on a base level within your neighborhood. Right. So whether or not you're a Hoover Street Crip or Inglewood family Blood, you are in your neighborhood. I am replacing something like that. Now, on the same hand, you can say that in college people go because they don't have brothers and they don't have sisters and things like that. But that's not our intention. Our intention is not to do death and destruction. It is happening. That is the problem. But it is not our intention. And that is a big line of demarcation. Again, when people flatten it and say, well, you're all the same, that is untrue. And it's important to recognize that it's untrue. There are completely different things that happen within the dynamics of Bloods and Crips in particular, which I know very, very well growing up in South Central LA, and versus being in fraternities and sororities.
Do you agree with that, Dr. Lindsey, that there is not
a gang member? Yes, I'm not a gang member. However, what I will say is that range of people that are in these organizations doesn't mean there are not folks who are gang affiliated that are part of our organizations. So I want to acknowledge that. But I think what Mr. Jones may have been speaking to in light of what has happened recently, right? And my deepest condolences to Caleb's family, the community, the Southern University community that's been rocked.
I'm gonna lay out that whole story in a sec too, so don't worry.
Of this, it's just on my mind and on my heart as I think about it. There are parts of this that are very ugly, that absolutely feel very gang-like. Right? To be jumped in, to be beat in, to be brutalized in to kind of conform, to humiliate. There are absolutely pledge processes that reproduce that harm. That is without question. And there are too many lawsuits for us not to say that. And Black Greek letter organizations and Greek letter organizations broadly, and joining banned fraternities. Like, this exists. Again, shout out to Byron Hurt, his work on the documentary about hazing. And so that part of it does make us have to sit and reflect on what are the values that we're bringing in to these organizations? What are the practices that we're bringing in? When we say historically Black, there's this thing that some of us imbibe, that we have to struggle for something to be deserved, right? We have to persevere, that we endure physical, emotional, psychological, all of these kinds of things in order to be able to have something, to get somewhere, to really feel like you earned it and struggle for that. And that is something I want to rest my people of. Yeah. Right. And I say that because often what happens in that, with that mentality, that mentality isn't just about tenacity and perseverance and working hard, or whatever ethic that we're talking about, or resiliency. It's built with a kind of complicity to accepting certain levels of violence, harm, that mirror the ways that we are instructed by all kinds of systemic and institutional forces to be okay with that, to not push back against it, to not resist when we know something is not actually making us a better person. It's not actually making us more of a sister, a soror, a brother, a whatever, but it's actually making us want to be able to enact that same violence and harm on somebody else.
Yes.
At some point. And I think we have to be very honest about the ways we imbibe those dynamics and then reproduce that harm and how we see that influence. Because imagine if you're going to college, there's a number of our members, right? First generation. I know what the struggle is. Right. You have to persevere, endure. You got to be twice as good, hard. You got to fit this narrative. You got to be this person. And so you come into these organizations to pledge, to go through membership initiation, whatever you call it, membership intake. And you have that in mind too. And I think there's a really big difference between understanding perseverance and hard work, and then complicity with levels of violence and harm, and then becoming a harm doer yourself. Yeah. That's what you went through. It's literally abusive logic. Yeah. It's literally abusive logic. There's no way around that. Now, we can talk about the ways that we normalize abusive logic and don't see it as such. But there's no question in my mind that, well, I went through it harder, so you have to go through it hard in order for you to be made the right way. And I think this is a conversation we have to have.
And that's true if you begin from the premise that it's wrong, that there's nothing redemptive in the Bible.
That embodying of that logic would suggest that you don't believe that that's wrong, right?
And that's the thing I think we have to trouble, because I think there are so many people, and I agree with you. I think there are just so many people who don't accept that premise. It's the same argument we see around spanking and beating.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah,
it's the same conversation. And there are Black people. No, there are people in general. I just care about Black people the most. There are Black people who I talk to who I cannot convince them that beating their kids is not the only way to save them. Is that the only way to raise them right, to make them right? I mean, to your same point, right? I turned out fine.
Yeah, that's literally the violence.
That's literally the argument they make.
You're hitting a child.
There might be an argument that you didn't turn out all right, that you're beating a 2-year-old.
That's literally the connection that we have between gangs and fraternal organizations. We go through regardless of whether or not you got a 1600 on your SAT or you got thank you very much for still filling out your name on the SAT. And
that was me.
Don't trip. We all. And this is where we come to the unity of where violence and power comes into. And this is not, again, like you were saying, this is not just Black people, because predominantly white fraternities and sororities have the same issues, right? But in terms of breaking the idea that violence and power is something that we have to break. The reason why we can't break that is because it's a validator to people, right? It's a validator for people to say, I am who I am because of the lesson that I learned from my mama making me go and pick a switch. Dr. Stacey Patton talks all about this, right? And when you ritualize it, we ritualize it every single holiday period when Black folks gather in social media. And we'll say, what type of switch did you get when your grandma told you go get a switch, right? And community does not want to be an outlier. Community wants to feel a part of the system. So even if you weren't beaten, what you basically try to do is emulate the idea that, oh, yeah, I got that same experience too. It reminds me of like the very first time you go to Black Student Union, right? And you go to Black Student Union, and at the end of the evening, they go, let's sing the Black National Anthem. Okay, cool for me. I grew up in the Black church, right? For somebody from the suburbs who may not have a connection to the Black church and is still as Black as I am, they get there and they go, oh, raspberry, 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 until they get through it. And then the next week they learn it. And they think in their brain they've always learned, because that's a validator for what the Black cultural experience is. So that's the exact same reason, for example, why you get fraternity and sorority members who, whatever their process, they get bigger and tougher as they go along in their age. Instead of, oh, I went through the process and I finished. No, 70,000 brothers saw me before I crossed, right? Making us the hardest line ever to go through. And we perpetuate that. Well, then guess what? If I'm a brother, I'm 59 years old. I've been in an organization for 40 years, since I was 19. Does a 19-year-old want to come up to me and look at himself as being Alpha 1B because his, experience isn't as grand as I make mine? Well, that's the problem. We perpetuate it. And when we perpetuate that, then we perpetuate the validation. And then folks seeking that validation, they will easily be placed in situations, and our members know this, in situations that are vulnerable for them.
Let's talk specifically about this case, just so people have some context for people who don't fully understand hazing and sort of what it can entail. This young man right here, his name is Caleb Wilson, 20 years old. Jesus. He was a 20-year-old college band member and mechanical engineering student at Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He was killed on February 27th, as a direct result of a hazing incident. That's according to the Baton Rouge Police Chief, Thomas Morse Jr. There are several levels to this, but he was repeatedly punched in the chest during a hazing ritual, according to the police. We initially heard that they were out in the park. And as soon as I heard the story, I knew enough to not believe the story.
Easy.
I was like, all right, this is going to be, all right, give it another day. More will come out. Always does. It always does. And according to the latest information that we have, another man also named Caleb, wow, coincidence, his name was Caleb McCrae, allegedly, and at least two others were hitting Mr. Wilson, along with 8 others. So it's a line of 9 people who are pledging for admission into Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. And they were struck by Mr. McCrae and others wearing boxing gloves. Allegedly, Mr. McCrae hit Mr. Wilson 4 times in the chest, after which he collapsed, suffered a seizure, and lost control of his bodily functions, according to the arrest warrant. Allegedly, no one present attempted to call for emergency assistance. No one called 911. They took him to the hospital. That's all I can say. That's all the concrete evidence. I've heard other things. I've talked to people on the yard. I've heard a lot of stuff, but I don't want to get into that because I don't know. I can't confirm it. I will tell you that the man who's been arrested, Caleb McCrae, is 23 years old. He's a member of the organization and a graduate student. I believe, it's been unclear whether he's a graduate student or just a graduate. I've heard both things, but But he graduated from Southern in December of 2024. So he just recently graduated.
Yeah.
He's an Army National Guard member. He's a member of the organization. These are all the things that it's important to know. He is right now being charged with. There's great talk that he'll be charged, that the charges may escalate. Mm-hmm. Misdemeanor hazing, manslaughter, criminal hazing, and manslaughter are two things that are on the table. Others may be added to the table.
Yeah.
I wish sincerely that this was an outlier. I wish that this was one of those crazy stories you hear and then we talk about forever. Mm-hmm. But it's a story that we hear and then we talk about to the next one, and then the next one, and the next one, and it's every semester. Mm-hmm. And I'm tired of it. I don't have any. I don't stand from a place of moral purity on this. I don't stand from a place of innocence in this. And what I mean specifically, to be clear, is there have been times where I have said that I'm open to this as an idea, that there might be some value in this. I remember being interviewed for Byron Hurt's film on hazing. And we had a very different conversation I would have with him right now. I still think it's complicated and nuanced, but at the end of the day, I no longer feel that it is healthy or safe or wise. But I'll take it one step further and say even helpful.
Yeah. There's no metric. There's no metric that you can say, as I always talk about. I know brothers who can take wood all day can't show up to a meeting on time, right? And I've talked to you privately about this. I've said, I've gotten to the point where I almost don't like talking about it, because I get to the point. I've been over the last, I was in Byron's film too, talking about this exact same thing. And, the Divine Nine came out 25 years ago, and I started lecturing about hazing 25 years ago. And the most absolutely heart-wrenching thing is watching the exact same thing happen in almost the exact same way. Whether or not you're talking about Joel Harris at Morehouse, or whether or not you're talking about Michael, for Kappa Psi in the mid-90s. I can't remember his name. Michael Davis in the mid-90s, and to this day, 2001, the two women who died over here locally in Los Angeles. And what happens all the time is that the conversations evolve in the exact same way, right? There's a philosophical argument of like in two different areas. They go, well, I don't want people to die on one side. And then the other is, I believe pledging is a thing, but I don't believe that hazing has to be part of it. And I'm like, I'm not going to curse on your thing, but throw that shit out. Throw that whole shit out. What disgusts me more than anything is that we rearrange the chairs on the Titanic. And when we start thinking about like things that we have not done before, and we say, look, we can't look at any of these models anymore. We can't risk one person is not a person that we can say, we sacrifice him because 99 of times it's okay, right? Or I came through there. I'll be damned. My son is 26 years old, right? He's not a member of the fraternity. He went to art school. He's an artist. He ain't really tripping off us. But I'll be here to tell you, I'm not here. I'm a life member of Alpha Phi Alpha, and this should not have to be my personal son. But I'll be damned if Alpha does anything to my son, right? But that's for every son. That's for every woman who wants to pledge. And what the problem is, and just my little rant here, is that we are so caught up with this idea of tradition. We're so caught up with this idea of validation. We're so caught up with this notion that what we know is the best for our boys or our women. And then when we do it, not a single person who's ever hazed in all these scenarios. By the way, they almost always leave the pledge who is dead. They almost always lie. They almost always never take him to the hospital. They almost always do all.
Or they drop him off and run. Yeah.
They always run. All the fraternalism that they said they're giving them, they never exhibit it when the person is in trouble. Never. And it just gets to my point of like, how do we have all these beautiful Black brains? I am the most optimistic person when it comes to Black intelligence to figure out solutions. And all we can do is go, in essence, that's a pity. I send prayers and thoughts and prayers, but nothing changes from the next period of time to the next period of time. I'm thunderstruck by that all the time.
You said a lot there. I want to bring in a comment before I go to Dr. Lindsey on this. Jay Davis sent in a super chat saying gangs, fraternities, sports teams, etc., seem to have a military-like sentiment that you must be proven physically to be worthy. And then Jordan Franklin said something that I think is what you're going to hear a million times tonight or elsewhere.
Yep.
He said, as a man who pledged, I believe pledging is good and serves a great purpose, but it has been mismanaged by college kids who misused it. So there's an argument here that, there's an argument here that pledging, there's two arguments here. One might be the distinction between pledging and hazing. And people say hazing is bad, but pledging is the proper process. And that's good. That breeds discipline and desire for the organization, commitment, etc. It teaches you a lesson. It breaks you down to build you up. But these college kids have taken a wonderful process and messed it up. But at its core, it's a good thing. And so if we could just get back to the core, we'd be fine. Dr. Lindsey, what say you? I know Lawrence is chopping the bit again, but
I'm sorry.
Good.
I don't know what this alleged core is, this imagined core. And the fact that every year, semester, whatever, we're having this conversation again, the college, whatever, misused it. It's just not true. So that's just one, right? Like it's factually not true that these are singular incidents. And just because someone doesn't die doesn't mean they weren't harmed during the process. It doesn't mean that someone doesn't have real lasting PTSD from having gone through the things they went through or seeing the things that they saw if they went through a particular kind of process and endured violence. Like we're going to pretend that watching violence in this context is not impacting us, but watching violence in this way, that is terrible, right? Like watching someone get beat with a bat, if it's a police officer, we are clear that that is terrible and harmful. Watching the young brother or sister person next to you be beat with a bat during a process, that builds character. That doesn't make sense. And I think we just have to say, like, for those who are saying that want to make this distinction, I don't think it's just semantics, but I do think you're making a false thing here. Like pledging is different from hazing. Well, how are 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, 23-year-olds, 40-year-olds making those distinctions? What is it? Tell me what it is. Tell me what pledging is. Does not rely upon an abusive logic. Right. Tell me what it is. Tell me how you can instill a sense of tenacity, sisterhood, brotherhood, final whatever, friendship, thinking of all our different mottos, fortitude, value here, that isn't rooted in breaking someone down. Do you hear yourself when you say that? I need to break you down to build you up. As opposed to, I want to build you up and make you better, right? And make us a better. But even that thing is just, I think it's disingenuous. And I think it's for those of us who are grappling with what we went through in our own processes and feeling like, again, I came out okay. Therefore, if we just go back to what it is I went through, everything will be okay.
Right.
I don't like, and as someone who pledged, I don't have a thing about saying there are things that happen that should not have happened.
Oh, right.
That's just the reality of it. I don't take pride in it. I might have at some point, but I don't take pride in that. And I don't take pride in the fact that what has that meant in terms of the ways that I treat other people? How has that made me a better sister or soror? How has that made me a better servant of communities? I need to know. I need to actually know. Just stop telling me that pledging and this makes you better and makes you do the thing. Tell me how.
And
give me specifics. I need details. Tell me how getting your ass beat made you a better person and a better servant of your community. Tell me.
I always like to bring up, before you come in, I always like to bring up the data. Studies don't show that. Studies don't bear out that people who go through hazing are more likely to be financial. They're not. They don't show that they're more likely to be active. They're not. There's some data that suggests that you have a higher kind of affective connection to the organization, but you're actually less likely to be active in
lightweight trauma bonding.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
The language of trauma bonding correctly. Trauma bonding is not because like I share my trauma, you share your trauma, and we're bonding. Trauma bonding is when the person who has abused you, you start to identify with the person who abused you. That's what trauma bonding is. Damn therapy speak getting out and being on social media. Trauma bonding is a real thing and it's about a relationship between an abuser and an abused person. So when you talk about this in that way, right, like you're saying, I am bonded through this experience. I have a more affective tie to my organization because someone in an organization beat my ass and therefore I'm ready to be somebody else's ass. That actually is trauma bonding, my friend. No matter how you slice that.
So I mean, Lawrence, Lawrence, you had Line Brothers, right?
Yeah, I have 6 line. We're line of 6. Yeah.
Okay, I was line of 2. I don't believe Dr. Lindsey had lines. That's why that's why I'm asking it. That's why I'm not trying to be funny.
No.
So I want to ask you your connection to because someone would say the process builds a brotherhood with your line brothers that you otherwise could not have. I will be honest with you. My relationship to my line brother, I don't know how we would have built that relationship in the way that we did through another way. I'm not saying there's not another way. I'm saying I have yet to think of another way. I believe there is another way. I just don't know what it is. So I do, and so I say that to say I understand why people, after going through, 3 months, 2 months, 3 weeks, if you're out for 4 or 5 days, whatever of a process, makes you say, we together forever now because we went through some shit.
Yeah, but okay. So like, for example, this is pretty, so my line crossed on April 21st. So this is going to be our 40th year. So we're literally in our group chat talking about, hey, we're going to hook up, right, for our 40th line crossing anniversary, right? So I think the it's complicated. Okay, so in a couple of different ways. I always talk about fraternities and sororities are in the experience business, right? We're in the experience business. I was online for 7 weeks and a day. I've been an alpha for 39 years, 300 and whatever days, right? What do you think has had the biggest impact on my life, right? Me being an alpha versus my line. Do I love my line brothers? Well, one was in my wedding, various, one we lost, all those things that come from a mutual shared experience is what we were going to be bonded by, right? And it's also the notion of creating kind of this intensified experience of people who don't know each other, who go through an experience, and then suddenly they're bonded because they now know each other because they went through the mutual experience. The problem is that you didn't need violence to do that. You literally did not need to use violence to do that. And I came from, and this is what always blows my mind, because fraternalism usually is based upon a lot of people with myopic, very limited anecdotal understandings of fraternalism, right? They know their chapter, they know their line brothers, they line sisters, maybe 5 years before, 5 years afterward, in terms of those members. If they go to a district meeting, whoa. They go to a regionals, my God. They go to a convention, we're talking about the tiniest percentage, right?
Yes.
And so they don't even know their organization, right? So what happens is that what becomes the heightened part of their experience? That little period of time where they were actually online. Also, the other thing that happens, and this is the thing that just been blowing my mind, is that people then glorify times that they weren't even born in, because they see it as a symbol of being when things were actually okay. Like I had someone who crossed in 2017 tell me that the above ground period eliminated all the things that you see in the above underground. And I'm like, tell me more, because I crossed in 1985. And if you were online and the brothers did not think that you were, you could be online, we could see all the things. If we thought you skated, we thought you skated, right? If your chapter didn't do this and this chapter did that, well, we looked at you in various metrics, right?
Lawrence, let me pause you for 1 second, just for the audience's sake, since this is office hours. When we're talking about above ground, below ground processes, what we're saying, so Black Greek letter organizations from the moment they started, allegedly in 1906, up through the 20th century, they were above ground processes. These were legal, colleges sanctioned them.
No. We need to get actually more pedantic about that. Right?
Okay, because legal is an interesting word. Yeah, go ahead.
Understand that I love you put the allegedly back there in the 1906 thing. I saw your slide.
I'm just saying Alpha Kappa Nu was actually founded in 1903.
We've had precursors. We've had precursors of different organizations who did not survive. But just in terms of just saying that, when we first began, we did not have pledge processes. Okay,
that's true.
Normally, what happened was we had something that we actually took from white fraternities and sororities, which is called Tap Day. Tap Day was literally at the Howard University. They line up. The fraternity men would come, particularly Alpha was like the most known for it. They would tap the members. They would bring them in for ritual, and then bam, they were members of the fraternity. That's how we did it up until the 1920s, and we began with Kappa Alpha Psi with the Scrollers Club. The Scrollers Club was just based upon the notion we're now a national organization. We need to have a system where people actually understand that Kappa Alpha Psi has 10 founders and not 15. We hear the tenets of it, and so you begin to see the Ivy Club, the Sphinx Club, the Pyramid Club, all of the crescents and the like begin to do the exact same thing. What you see, what we, in terms of like the old school idea of pledging was, and by the way, Dr. Watts Kimbrough was way better at this in terms of explaining this than I am, but I listened to him a lot. We basically took a lot of the things, the same thing that the white fraternities, sororities did, take a lot of the pledging and hazing things that would happen, and particularly at HBCUs, and adopted them for the Divine Nine. So, and I say that in the fact that anything that we have in our organizations, the most variable thing in our organization is our pledge processes. Mm-hmm. And yet every single member believes that they're upholding some grand tradition of pledging. It is the reason why you can go back to the 1970s and a person will, or the 1950s, they'll say, I pledged for a whole year. And then the 1970s, they'll say,
my dad did.
And then when I came in, it was a 6 to 8 week period. Right. And then after that, it was something else they did. I can't remember, before the moratorium. Each one believes that they are upholding some tradition that really, in essence, is something that is really short. It is really not cohesive. Usually it is determinative by 700 different individual chapters who create their own processes based upon kind of like the rubric of the national organization. This is what I'm talking about in terms of like anecdotal, in terms of what we see from hazing incidents, right? So this notion that pledging, when people say pledging is different than hazing, they just mean that the blow that they threw didn't cause the person to die. That's all they mean. That's all they mean. That's all they mean.
That's a powerful point. So in line with that, just to tie up the thread, up until the late 1980s, you could argue 1989, 1990, this process happened above ground. You knew who was pledging, who was going through the pledge process.
Yes.
Because they'd march the yard. They'd be out. They'd wear stuff. If you watch a movie like School Days, you kind of see what that might look like in some form or fashion. In 1989 to 1990, largely, not exclusively, but partially because of the death of Joel Harris at Morehouse College, he was an initiate or a pledge for Alpha Phi Alpha, and he was killed. The organization said enough. Yeah. And pledging was no longer permissible on campuses. There was no longer allowed to be a pledge process, and pledge processes were replaced by membership intake programs, MIPs, MOIPs, etc. And the idea now was that you wouldn't be crossed. At least in Kappa, the idea was you wouldn't be crossed in your chapter anymore. Yeah. That crossings would happen regionally or nationally only, and that there would no longer be a chapter defined kind of entry point into the organization, to Lawrence's point, because they were so variable. For example, when Kappa Scrollers Club starts in 1919, now there is no more Scrollers Club.
Right.
in theory, right? Because you're not scrolling. You know, so somebody who comes in 1990, I'll say to be certain, so no one thinks I'm being shady. Anybody say if you come in 1993 or forward, you took a test, you went through a formal process, and you're a member. Tell us that's it, right? What people are arguing is because the process was forbidden, it didn't stop pledging. It just made pledging no longer be above ground and moved it underground. They compare it to like prohibition, that when you ban alcohol, it didn't stop people from drinking alcohol. It just moved alcohol to the underground, which then produces organized crime and all these other things. Because now, instead of the kid marching the yard and you know that he's pledging Omega Psi Phi or Kappa Alpha Psi or whatever, now they're in the warehouse up the road or they're in the basement down the street. And now this 18-year-old is overseeing the process, except now the faculty and the student body don't know that John Smith is online. Right, so they can't watch. They don't know that he's limping. They don't know why he's limping. They don't know.
No. Okay.
No, I'm just making the argument. I want you to.
Hold on, just 1 second. Let me just stop right here. They still didn't know where you were pledging your people, even above ground.
Right, but they knew. The argument is that they knew who was right. You knew that there was a line of people.
But let me give you a quick. We've had plenty of folks come out for a probate with broken.
Just let me lay out the argument because people who don't understand, I just want people to understand fully the argument that people are making. I'm not agreeing with the argument. So the argument that people are making is now because it's so shrouded in mystery, it makes it easier to be violent. It makes it easier to be reckless, and because there's no oversight, and that if we could just go back to an above ground process where everybody could see it, we could make safe and healthy choices. Now tear it up. I just wanted to make sure I wanted to present the argument.
Yeah, okay. I'm Dr. Lindsey. I promise you, I'm not gonna. That's rearranging the deck chairs. Above ground went away because it did not work. Okay. The same things that we have with underground, say, for example, yes, you saw me with my uniform. You saw me running from big brother to big brother and greeting them and all that stuff. That's great. That's all the exterior stuff. You still didn't see where the set was. You still didn't see if a person had a session inside of a house or in a basement or anything like that. And yeah, you'll be able to identify if I have a broken arm that, hey, he's got a broken arm. But people just looked at it from the standpoint of that's just how you pledge. You have a continuous validation loop of like people who then look around and go, well, if he has a broken arm, they must be pledging those boys hard. I couldn't count on my hand, and nor did I actually think when we were pledging people of anybody who was legitimately going to say anything about our Sphinx when we brought him out. Like nothing. I lost almost 20 pounds, like online. I went from 155 to 135. Do you think people didn't notice that in class? Not a single person said,
they didn't think it was that Dick Gregory Bahamian diet.
Well, he did come to campus, so I did remember that. But I mean, when you look at it from that standpoint, I'm like, I don't care if it's above ground or underground, get rid of it. Think of something different in which we can say, what are the validation points that we want, right? And I've always said, I don't have to throw wood against an aspirant. I can absolutely, at the interview, listen to what they're saying. And if they're, as I talk about, they're fixing and finning to do community service, but they've never done community service in their life, they're fixing to do it and they're finning to do it, vote no. If you see them doing activities that are uplifting the community and they don't do that, vote no. They don't change. So if you're sitting— Wait a minute,
you're saying that if I put somebody in a cut and beat them, hit them with a 2x4 100 times a night, that they won't start doing community service?
Not only that, they will be anti-community service. You've given them no incentive. And a lot of times what happens, and this is the thing that, beyond just the death and destruction that breaks my heart, is that a lot of these folks, particularly on the college chapter, come unformed. They come unformed. They've reached this level, and the arrogance, as Dr. Lindsey was talking about breaking down, the arrogance of 18 to 20-year-olds or anybody, thinking that a community that built them up to get to a school of higher education needed you, not their mother, not their father, not their family, not their community, not their barber, not their beauty salon, you, to break them down and build them up. Because of what expertise do you have? Because you've been in the organization 6 months, 18 months, 24 months? Or the person who is a grad member who has nothing else in their lives. And by the way, every hazing event includes grad members.
Yep.
Every last one of them. And so my frustration is this, you know, I love Black people to the core of my soul. And the fact that we have intentionally, purposely have no imagination, and nor will we give up the violence and power that we have been perpetuating because we want to say this and we want to say that, or this thing was beneficial to me, or it was beneficial to you, or we have these memories, is the thing that infuriates me more, because it's a preventable death. It's a preventable way of bringing people in. And I watch white fraternities actually change. Sigma Phi Epsilon is this is why Divine Nine members need to get off the whole idea of white folks do their thing over we do our thing. They actually have some of the same problems, but then they approach it differently. Sigma Phi Epsilon gave their brothers a choice. They said, here's the old process, you can have it, and there's no benefit to you, but you can have it, and here's a new process in which we have a revolutionary benefit to it. And they chose, the members, particularly the college members, chose the new process because they bought in. I don't understand why we can't be brave enough to do that.
Dr. Lindsey, I want you to respond to anything that you've heard, but I also want to add something too, which is, you know, this is often framed as a challenge of masculinity and a crisis of masculinity. And I think it is in so many ways. But I also have seen and heard of many hazing incidents in sororities. Is this a case of women attempting to perform masculinity and patriarchy? Or is there a whole other thing going on that we need to consider as well? Or is it some mix of both? What's happening here?
There's a lot going on. I think there is, as you said, I do think that there's patriarchy. We all are unlearning patriarchy. That includes women, girls, femmes, gender expansive people who are raised under the patriarchy. I'm constantly unlearning it, and I'm someone who identifies as a feminist and the ways that I'm invested in it. And so that divestment and how we show power, I think one of the key ways that we understand power is patriarchal power. And so what does that look like? What kind of domination does that look like? How hard are you going to go? How violent is it going to be? What parts of the process are going to be there? I also think that resonates alongside internalized misogyny and the ways that it shows up in pledge processes within sororities and what that looks like, how you engage other women and femmes when you're going through that process. And we're all grappling with, when we're thinking about the collegiate process, young, adolescent, your whole shit is still being formed as a person. You are a young adult for the most part. And so all of that is coming out in these processes as well. And the ways that we begin to unlearn that are really just starting to happen, right? I'm in a college classroom, the first time I'm really having robust conversations about misogyny and patriarchy. Meanwhile, I'm invested in an organization and moving in a process in an organization where I'm having to question and interrogate, well, how does misogyny and patriarchy play out in the kind of rituals, traditions, practices, etc.? And I'm going to say traditions in quotations that we have about what makes me a woman deserving of being part of this beloved sisterhood, right? That represents these values and these things. And the fact that we understand the ways that internalized misogyny and patriarchy play out in these dynamics, I think gives us a little more insight into some of the more disturbing aspects of pledging that we've heard within sororities. So the deaths are not just fraternities, right? We mentioned deaths of women who were pledging, stories that still sit on my spirit. And I think about all the time when I'm having these conversations or when I'm just thinking about intra-communal violence, because that's what it is. It is intra-communal violence. And our dishonesty about that is what bothers me the most. Like, we have to acknowledge that we're doing a thing. And we have to decide we want to do something different. We're just not holding each other with care. And I think there's another example of the ways that we don't hold each other in care. So even in a process that's supposed to be about sisterhood and or brotherhood, we're literally saying, I can handle you carelessly and then expect you to care.
Yeah.
That it's
what do you say to the person who says it's not carelessly, that we see care and value and intentionality in the discipline that we apply in that process?
Absolutely, there's intentionality. Intentionality doesn't necessarily make something have a net positive effect, because there's an intention that you're doing, and it is a presumptive that if I do this to you, then this is the result, as opposed to this is the consequence, this is the fatal outcome of this. But knowing that there's a possibility of a fatal outcome or a lifelong consequence, or a harm, like some kind of harm that resonates within that detaches that person from wanting connection and community or sisterhood or brotherhood. What an incredible loss. And so much like we were talking about earlier when we mentioned Stacey Patton's work and thinking about how do we divest from notions of disciplining our children in such violent ways, I think that same kind of insidious logic, this insipid logic, is rooted in our need to say, this is how you have to do this. This is the way you will be made, right? And again, that language, to go back to Jim Jones' point, like, you get made. I'm like, oh, like the Bob, like I'm a made man, you know what I mean? Like, there are things that you do and language that we've imbibed that we can sit here and pretend like we know there are some fundamental differences between us and, you know, the Gambino family, or between us and Street Disciples, and also recognize that there are some language crossovers and practice crossovers that I think we need to be more honest about and be like, you know what are the ways we perpetuate intracommunal violence? What are the ways we don't hold each other with care? What are the ways we don't hold each other warmly? And what does not holding each other warmly in a moment do for us if we're saying that this thing has liberatory potential? If you're saying that the kind of brotherhood or sisterhood we're forming has a particular kind of potential, what gets limited when part of that potential is so deeply enmeshed in a violent logic?
There's a question that came for you from Bullet the Bunny. Dr. Lindsey, do you think your personal realization only comes from maturity and life experience? How do we communicate experience to young folk? And there's a particular value to that question for me, because I think so many people go, and it's not just about pledging now. As college students, we did a bunch of wild, fun shit. And then we got older and said, you know, that wild, fun shit was a terrible idea. And then we tell the young people, don't do that wild, fun shit we did. How do we communicate to these people that, because they'd be like, y'all turned out great.
But did we? I mean, that's
I feel you, but maybe that's the end. But so how do we communicate that?
I mean, I think it is that narrative honesty, right? Of thinking through, and that having that relationship. I don't, even from my position as an educator, what I go into the classroom with is not an attempt to convince you that this is the way, I am right? That I am this. I come into the classroom as an expert. I come into the classroom, so I come to a conversation with a certain set of experiences that I've had, that I can reflect on, that I can talk to you about. And I can sit and ask, like, what is it that you think you'll gain from a process that does X, Y, or Z? It's a set of questions that I think we pose to young people. I think the kind of didactic, kind of just, we did this so you wouldn't have to approach is a failing approach when we're talking to folks about this. I think what is more useful, perhaps more generative, is to have a real conversation and to ask certain questions of ourselves publicly that we're willing to have with them, and to say, you know, I learned this and I understand where you're coming from. I get it, actually. I get it on the level that I did it. It's not even that I get it. Like, I literally did it. So I understand that. But I'm interrogating, what do you think you're going to get from it? Because I'll tell you what I thought I got from it at the time, and what over time became clear about what I did not, in fact, get from it. And what are the parts of things that did inform who I am and shape who I am? And I think some of the best parts of me that you're seeing and this person is embracing, or a young person who you're who's entrusting you with this conversation, you have to be honest about those shaping parts. You have to be transparent. You have to be explicit. You have to make those connections. And to be frank, a lot of us have not done that deep work, right? We have not done that deep work to be able to say that. I am still processing, gosh, going in, this is year 22 for me as a Delta, right? So it's my founder's year, right? And I still think about this question. When I talk to my mom, who's a Delta, about Caleb, I mean, she was mortified, right? She was absolutely mortified. But in one of her responses, funny enough, she's gonna kill me for saying this, she was like, now see, there's supposed to just be little light stuff on turn back night. It's like, wait, Mom, right? And she's pledging in 1970, right? So like, for a year and for this and it's public and it's all of these things. But even then she's conceding. And then she was like, and that didn't really make sense then either, baby. But you know, it took me a minute to realize that it didn't mean. The thing that bonded me were these moments and this thing that happened and this thing that happened. And yes, having to outthink a question that seems absurd and ridiculous and figuring that out with a group of women who I did not come in knowing a good number of them, and figuring that out together, figuring out when are we going to cross these burning sands? Like not knowing that and pursuing. But she was able to tell me what values were attached to certain parts of her process. When she talks about certain other parts of her process, as do I don't actually have a value assessment attached to them. And I think that's the thing I want to be explicit about.
There's a question coming in from Fly Science who say, can the panel answer why did you all continue with the process once you knew physical harm was involved? If you feel comfortable answering that. If not,
I mean, I didn't grow up without physical harm being in my life. So physical harm actually wasn't something that felt not a part of a process or like what I did or what I encountered. And I say that not to indict close people in my life or anything like that, but just to say like, I absolutely grew up with the notion that violence is a part of an experience and that some forms of violence are about making you better. I had imbibed that logic. And so physical harm didn't scare me away from being a part of something. I mean, and quite frankly, I'd faced far more violent physical harm in my life than that. So,
and I think it's an interesting question too, because it presumes that the violence would be the thing that would dissuade you, when some of us came to it for that. Like, there's a way that or maybe not for that, but some of us welcome the challenge to prove that we could do it. It wasn't like you showed up one night, you turned in your paperwork and it was like, oh shit, y'all about to whoop my ass. It was like, okay, I'm preparing myself. So, and I'm not speaking about myself personally, you know, or my organization, but I'm just saying in general, this is what happened. My oldest brother pledged fall 87. My father pledged spring 53. So in both cases, they went through the organization at a time where pledging was legal. So I can comfortably speak about their processes.
Yeah.
And when you hear that journey, and to Lawrence's point, you hear it romanticized and bragged about and talked about. And I never forget, I called my oldest brother when I was considering becoming a captain. And I asked him, I said, well, you know, what's pledging like? He said, it's fine as long as you ain't no bitch ass digger.
Yep.
What do you do with that, right?
It feeds into your validation,
right.
which feeds into the idea. I mean, this is, you know, this is the funny part. The reason why I hate that question, and it's not because I, hate the person who said the question. I'm just saying that because it presumes to put the responsibility on the person who is taking part in the process. And the responsibility of the person who is going to your organization, which you created an oath for, right? You are the one who said that you would follow the rules and bylaws of the organization. And you presume that me walking into a new scenario particularly a scenario. I don't care if you could hear the chatter underneath or the kind of the ideas of what you should know and everything like that. My uncle's a Kappa. My aunt is a Delta, right? So they're older than me, but I knew a little bit about the organizations and stuff like that. But there's a presumption that says that when you are part of a process and violence is going on, that you are not trusting the organization to create a scenario that it is not going to hurt you or get you killed. And also, it also strips away the things that actually make you want to do this in the first place, beyond just whatever your goals are, which are validation, the peer pressure of being, like, for example, if someone we even label them, back in the day, if someone dropped line, they became eternal sphinxmen. It was almost like putting together a scarlet A on their chest, saying that they weren't good enough to actually be able to go through the process. So you put all these things together, and it's a conspiracy. It almost acts like a conspiracy because nobody tells anybody during the open case, hey, this is what's going to happen, and you should keep your eyes open. No one says that in open things. It's a conspiracy of basically the person who's in the organization and the person who is trying to become a member of the organization. But the person who's trying to become a member of the organization has no responsibility for the process. They don't have any responsibility for understanding what limits are for the process. And also, they don't have any responsibility for understanding whether or not they're in danger or not. Just for argument's sake, for Caleb probably watched his big brothers put on boxing gloves and thought to himself, this is going to be safer than if they hit me in the chest with their bare fists. That's a logical thought in their head.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry?
I said absolutely.
And the ones who were putting on the boxing gloves thought that they were being more safe than the people on the next chapter who just hit people in the head with their fists. Each one thinks that they're doing the right thing, but they put themselves in, the fraternity has put themselves, or the fraternity or the sorority has put themselves in danger. The pledge has nothing to do with whether or not it's a false equivalence to say that they have as much free will. They don't have free will. They don't have as much free will as the people controlling the process. And that's what we got to understand. We've got to understand, if you can't have a process that is not illegal, and you cannot put any responsibility on anybody else.
You know, and I agree with all of that. The idea of putting the burden on them, the idea that it's, and when you're going through that, I would imagine you're saying everybody here survived it. They clearly know what they're doing. I have no reason to trust that they won't.
Mark, let me think. I'll tell you exactly the mentality. When I was online, literally, I think I was like 5th week, I looked at the other brothers who were pledging me, and I looked at them, and I looked for the weakest one. I was like, if that cat can cross, I can definitely cross.
Exactly.
And so what happens is you can rationalize anything. You can rationalize no matter what. You don't have to see what they did. You don't have to see whether or not they were the toughest or the weakest, but you can think in your head, if they can do it, I can do it. And the history of the organization is such that hundreds of thousands of millions of men have done this before me. So how am I in danger?
Yeah. Right. And I think to this point, and I spoke earlier in saying, like, because violence had been a part of my life, like violence continuing to be a part of my life was not going to be a surprise, which is not to say that an organization did harm me or whatever. What I'm saying in that is that the expectation in that space, if I think about it critically, is like people who harm us often are people who we have said, I love you to, that we're building relationship with.
Yeah.
That's not different from any other context, right? If you're pledging a sorority or a fraternity, you're seeking to be a brother or a sister in this context, and you've found this organization to mean X and this group of people to mean whatever to you. So I understand the kind of psychological thing of like, they wouldn't do this to harm me, right? This is part of a process that gets me ready to be closer to them and want to be with them. That's not different from the ways that we process the ways that other people in our lives who we want to build relationship with may do things that we feel that are harmful, not that we feel are harmful, that are harmful. there's a logic that we all imbibe that does that on various levels, right? And I think that proximity, that desire to be part of that thing, the desire to enact so that you continue to be part of that thing. So you were once a pledge and now you're pledging somebody, you replicate that, you build this ecosystem in which it's so normalized that it's really hard to extract the fact that at the end of the day, this is an act of violence. You don't see it in that way. Like, I really do feel like when I'm talking to other Greeks, there is this sense, there's a distancing from violence and what happens. But if I just describe an act, I'm going to punch you in the chest. There's no context in which that's not violent.
Right.
There's no context in which that's not violent. And yet, if we say, and this punching in the chest, we see that we're building you to this point that you can withstand and be resilient and not be affected by the world. And you create all of these narratives around it. But nothing changes the fact that the thing in itself is violent. Yeah. And that's the hardest part to get people to be as honest about, because not only do you have to think about the harm you endured, I think a lot of us then have to think about the ways that we perpetrate and are complicit.
I think it's the second part. Yeah, because I think most of those people would accept that it's violent. They would just say that all violence ain't bad. There's sometimes you need a little violence.
I thought
violence very differently. I mean, as someone who writes about violence, when I talk about it in like harm, the difference between harm, violence, this, like, you know what I mean? I think that people are making certain kinds of distinctions because people say violence or harm, and they're thinking about there's malice in it. Like there is something that is
so
there.
They accept the physicality of it, but they don't see it as a sort of ill-intended
physical thing that can like cause pain, right? But to understand that as violent, I think there is a disconnect that I think people are actively and unconsciously disentangling it from the ways that we think about what it is to met out violence, because then you have to think of yourself as predatory or abusive or any of the other words we use to describe violent acts. But if I repeatedly hit you in the chest, if I said that to you, right? I mean, I'm abolitionist, so I wouldn't say call the police, but you'd be like, Treva, that's not okay that someone is repeatedly hitting you in the chest.
Yeah, I would strongly resist that as a plan of action.
Yeah.
Can I think of anything good about it? I can't think of anything redemptive about it. I would be,
and that's the part. But if you feel like you've created narratives of redemption and there's something generative that can come from this, they'll learn X, they'll do Y, they'll be this kind of person in the aftermath of this.
But and I'm going back to the first person's or early commenter's point before we wrap this up, who talked about our religious traditions and stuff. I mean, we're taught that suffering is redemptive and we're healed by our stripes and all the stuff that makes us think that violence
journey to the cross is designed as the idea of suffering actually having a greater redemptive type of action. But can I say something? Because I'm reading some of the comments, but there's one that actually got me. I think, I don't know, AP said, man said with a straight face, they don't have free will. This tells me that, unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand how free will actually works. Free will is the ability to make choices without external forces being able to mitigate those choices. And free will does not mean, say, for example, you making the decision to go to 7-Eleven or going to Vons or whatever Kroger's for food because you have a free will to do either. That's your choice. External forces can be both physically and they can be mentally or psychologically. There's a reason why study after study after study, I mean, we can go from kind of like the debunked Stanford study, but, there are a bunch of different studies where we can find where people will create pain and cruelty based upon the notion that a authority figure or someone else is saying that it is okay to be able to do that violence. It is a reason why large groups, ethnic groups, will kill other people and people who were your local. The idea of the banality of evil is designed because ordinary people can do bad things, right? Ordinary people can do bad things. They can put people who are the victims of those bad things in places where they don't have free will to actually move. If we're going to solve problems like this is what I talk about in terms of us, particularly as members of fraternities and sororities, getting smarter. I mean, we can't just simply go out there and throw out things that don't make sense or arguments that don't make sense. We have to get smarter to be able to understand what are the things that we want from the experience for someone coming into our organizations that does not involve violence or power. And if you can do that, then you can recreate your intake into your organization. Don't do that, then hold on to all that, because you're just going to basically have the same conversation every 5 years. You're going to have the same conversation about someone dying every 5 years. And you're going to be thinking to yourself, oh, that's bad, but I still like all the things that are going on. And they should have been the ones to make the determination to avoid something that they don't know what's in front of them.
Powerful point, Shaw. I'm gonna leave it there only because we're at the 2-hour mark and I'm old and got to get up early to eat. So I'm saying because I'm fasting, so I got to get up. I got to get up at 5. So I got about 4.5 hours before I need to eat. Otherwise, I will oversleep and be very angry all day. I'm sure there's some redemption in that suffering too, but I just call it hungry. I'm going to say thank you all for this great conversation. There's so much more to be said. There's a million more things to be said. I know lots of people wanted to weigh in who didn't get a chance, so I'll try to put as many comments up as possible. There was somebody who earlier on had tweeted, the one I want to read, this one, Sage Brown said, we as D9 members are and need to be the leaders of our communities. We can do this. I do think that that's important. To reiterate that we do believe in Black people. We do believe in our capacity to change the world and to fix whatever predicament we're in. I don't have the answer, but I do know that there is one and that we have the ability to solve it. So I appreciate that encouragement. Amos Leak wrote in and said, Bloody Sunday was led by a Sigma 68. Absolutely. Shout out to the Sigmas again, all of them, not just, but Andrew Young. Is Andy Young a Sigma?
Andrew Young's an Alpha.
Alpha.
Excuse me. Who Dr. King's crew was a Sigma? Was that?
Oh, it was well, I mean, in terms of people always ask me this, and I forget affiliations. I know I'm supposed to know every last person.
I know, but there's a big, but
right? I'm sorry.
Harry Belafonte, isn't he a Sigma?
Hello, Harry Belafonte, but his crew was Jesse Jackson, Omega Psi-Phi.
Abernathy was a Kappa.
Ralph Abernathy is a Kappa. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
And there was a Sigma out there. I thought Andy Young was a Sigma.
I'm so sorry, y'all. It's 9:30. I'm not even thinking about fraternalism.
Well, look, it's midnight over here, but so you get no excuses, brother. But I swore Andy Young was a Sigma. You say he's an Alpha, I believe you.
Andrew Young?
Yeah.
Oh no, he's an Alpha. I see him at every convention.
I believe you. Y'all be knowing each other and smuggling people in. Didn't y'all make Frederick Douglass an Alpha or something?
Yeah, but that's funny. That's a funny historical note. People will say that. One of the things reason why Frederick Douglass at the time was made as an Alpha, the whole idea was basically the notion that the whole movement itself of fraternalism was created with this notion of kind of uplift for the community. And he was actually done historically with the permission of his widow, who thought that he would have considered to be a great honor. We get
just for clear thing, he died in 1895, and y'all were
that's true.
That's
true. But I think one of the things that happens is that I think we think there's a linear understanding of membership in our organizations, which really is
shit. Niggas getting all postmodern and when y'all start putting members in.
I mean, it's just like
Jesus said he was the Alpha and the Omega.
I think sometimes when we look at 2022, 2025, 1985, and 1905, I'm just going back into the 5, is as being all the same. And they're not. And the mentality of what people were thinking about and how they did the organization, even the idea of how they treated each other, is not necessarily the exact same. Within the fraternity, Martin Luther King and Thurgood Marshall did not get along. And none of them got along with Adam Clayton Powell. They're all Alphas.
That must have been the slowest argument ever.
You said what? You said what?
Just 3 slow talking people arguing just sounds wild to me. Like when I
yeah, I mean it's hilarious.
Talk that shit when I get over that.
But Adam Clayton Powell was talking that 10 times.
On that note,
he
was talking like, baby.
Right. Yeah. You know what? Let me read the rest of these comments because I will get in trouble. Let me see. Dr. Lindsay's had enough of us. She knows I get ridiculous at a certain point, and I'm gonna ruin this whole wonderful talk. Rhonda, thank you for your wonderful donation. There was a really wonderful. This is the one. Mega 62 said, "I want these guests' opinions on everything."
Oh, thanks.
Which it was very kind, and there were so many comments that said something very similar. Jazz LP, Dallas Finest, one of my favorite members, said, "I want this good Dr. Madame to be my mentor." Just so much love here. Jay Davis said, "Gangs, fraternities, sports teams, etc., seem to have a military-like sentiment that you must be proven physically to be worthy." I think we read that one. And then Chris Vaughn, thank you for that generous super sticker. I appreciate it. You have no idea how much we need this. Jared Denman said, "Grateful for this important conversation." I am equally grateful to y'all. Thank y'all. If you want to learn more about Black Greek letter organizations, I strongly suggest reading The Divine Nine. There are other books, but there's no book more important. There's no book more interesting.
As a secret socialist, I am a person who likes to spread it around. So Black Greek 101 also, and you can also look at some Ricky Jones's book on on hazing.
Black Haze.
You can also look at Greg Park's books on African American fraternities and sororities.
Yep.
You can also look at In Search of Sisterhood by Paula Giddings. There are a lot of books and a lot of scholarship on it, and I encourage you. I've never care about whether or not a person is pro or anti. I don't look at it like that because we're all in the Black community. But I want folks to be more informed about our organizations and to have a very so we can have intelligent discussions about it. That's what I would say.
Absolutely. This is Khayyal said, if y'all can claim Douglas, the Newts can claim Malcolm. I'll take that. That's
all right.
No.
Do what you
want. Call him Detroit Red. They call him Detroit Red. Detroit Red.
You know what that was, right?
You focus on the wrong part. I'm just trying to claim Malcolm.
I'm sure he'd be more closely associated. But that's a whole
different discussion.
Different.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody, make sure you also check out Dr. Lindsay's wonderful book. She has two wonderful books, but the most recent one and my fave, although I read them both and like them both, love them both, is America Goddamn: Violence, Black Women, and the Struggle for Justice. Boom. She made me recite that 100 times a night until I got it right. Did I get it right, big sister?
I'm a non-hazing organization.
Oh man, I love y'all both so much, man. Appreciate y'all. Thank y'all for doing the show. I'll talk to y'all soon. Everybody, thank you for watching the Office Hours tonight. It's been a wonderful conversation. I hope you learned as much as I did. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you're so inclined, also hit that join button and become a monthly subscriber to the channel. I appreciate it more than you know. It gives us the financial stability that we need to keep this train going on a day-to-day basis. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, but again, hit that join button. And if you can't make the monthly commitment, make a one-time commitment. We call it tuition for the month. Go to Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle and drop something in. If you drop in $1, we are grateful. If you drop in $1 million, we're grateful. Maybe even a little more grateful if you drop in $1 million. Anything in between is good too. Nothing's too little, nothing's too big. We just appreciate the support. But if everybody watching tonight were to drop $10 into the Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle, we would meet all of our financial goals for the month in terms of staffing, in terms of productivity, in terms of getting content out, and in terms of paying for the studio. Please consider it Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle. But again, no amount is too small. No amount is too big. We are grateful for you. But keep sharing the content, keep liking the content, but most importantly, keep studying the content, because that's what night school and office hours are all about. Peace.